And yeah, here we go. All right, so like I said, my name is Alex Campion Young. I am a Kappa from Epsilon Kappa chapter in the University of South Carolina, and I am currently the executive director of the Center for Girls Leadership. It is a nonprofit organization based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live, and we do leadership development for middle school and high school girls. So this is my passion. I am so excited to be here tonight and to share my thoughts about the book, but also to hear yours and to really make this as interactive as possible. So to get started, we are just going to figure out who exactly is on here. So we have a couple poll questions that will jump out at you in a second. And the first is going to be, are you a collegiate or an alumna member? Just so we have an idea. If you want to go ahead and take that poll. All right. We have about 70% reporting, and it is 100% alumna. That is great. Good to know. And then we will do our second question of, have you read the book Lean In? Awesome. Okay, so we are about 44% yes, 22% no, and about 33% have heard of it. So that is fabulous. You do not have needed to read this book tonight to join in the conversation. These topics and issues are relevant even if you haven't read the book. So don't feel like you're missing anything. It's not fiction. There's no spoiler. This is real life. So feel free to join in on that. So great. All right, so at the end of today, we will also be doing a surprise drawing for a $10 Amazon gift card at the end. So if we make it to the end, that's great. We'll do a drawing, and hopefully one of you will be walking away with a $10 Amazon gift card. And if it's someone who hasn't read the book, I highly suggest that you use that gift card to buy it. So one of the most important things about tonight is let's participate. This is not going to be just me talking about leadership, which I mean I could do if I wanted to, but I would love to hear everyone's thoughts. So as we go through and ask questions, I will be able to unmute you. You can raise your hand if you want to have a comment or share a story or share an experience that's relevant. This should be a learning space to talk about these issues that have been brought to us by Lean In and Sheryl Sandberg. So I really, really, really would appreciate if people participate. It's supposed to be like a book club, so you don't go to book club just to hear one person talk. So let's get started. Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I am, no, I'm not. So this is great. Here we go. All right, introduction. So the book basically has a premise of gender inequality exists and what do we have to show for it. So one of our first questions we're going to start off with is, what did past generations have to deal with that we don't have to deal with? And also, what are you most grateful for? So like I said, I want this to be interactive. So if you want to jump in, you can hit the raise your hand panel, and we can start unmuting people so they can join in this conversation. I will say I love the fact, this may seem super very kind of silly, but I love that we can wear pants. I know it's so basic, but I love being able to pull a pair of jeans out of my closet, and that is acceptable these days because of what women before us have gone through and have fought for. So that is one thing I'm glad we don't have to deal with, is the clothing. What about anybody else? Linda Patton, I see your hand is raised. Let me unmute you. There you go.
I'm a fifth-year Kappa, and I am glad that my granddaughter, who is a freshman this year in college, has more options than I did 50 years ago. When a woman got married, when I was in school, she stopped going to school and went to work to support her husband so that he could finish school, and she often did not.
Wow. Yeah, that is huge. I mean, just education alone. I mean, we've made such tremendous strides to be able to go to school and to have that education. And the fact that 50 years after you became a Kappa, your granddaughter now doesn't have that option of having to drop out of school if she decides to get married is pretty incredible. Thanks, Linda. Anybody else? All right, these are the easy questions, so participate now before we get to the tough stuff. So our next question we're going to talk about is men running the world. There's this concept that men run the world. I know the Beyonce song says girls run the world, but sometimes we notice that just really isn't true. So do you think it matters that men hold the majority of leadership positions in our world? And to that extent, what kinds of external or internal barriers make it difficult for women to reach the top? Yeah, Dana.
Well, hi, I'm Dana Polly, and I'm about at a Kappa about 15 years now, and I'm a veterinarian. And even though female veterinarians are about 75% of the workforce now, a very small percentage of us are actually in organized veterinary medicine and actually own businesses. And I think, unfortunately, we probably do a lot of this to ourselves because we just don't take the initiative, or we hold a lot of guilt in, how do I say it, in what we're missing out on, or who we wouldn't be taking care of if we took those jobs and we put that effort forward.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? It's interesting, Dana. I know you mentioned that being in a predominantly, did you say predominantly woman-led field, but still finding those opportunities. And finding those opportunities, I think, is one way that women can really support each other. Have you had any experience with that in reaching out to other women?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'm really blessed in the fact that I work with a lot of very strong women, and we tend to support each other really wonderfully and really help raise each other in that aspect. But it is hard to sometimes take that next step and worry, oh my gosh, what am I doing for my family if I take that next step, you know?
Absolutely. Does anyone else want to share? I think one of the internal barriers that Dana mentioned is ourselves. I think so often we get caught up on worrying too much or thinking about it too much, when sometimes we need to remember that we're our biggest barrier to success. And so making sure we internalize and recognize those signals that are coming from ourselves and saying, am I holding myself back from taking that next step to maybe the next step to a leadership position, or the next step to, you know, bettering my career? So sometimes that internal barrier is us. Great. All right. Next is in the book, Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg quotes Go back a page. There we go. Lema Gwibowi is saying that if she believes that women in power, there were more women in power, that would help all women everywhere. Do you agree with this? And what would be different, if anything, if there were more women in leadership positions? And again, to participate, you can either raise your hand or you can put your comments in the questions or in the chat box. We can share those comments if you don't want to raise your hand. All right, there, I fixed the problem of advancing screens. Apologize for that, everyone. This is my first webinar. I'm very excited to do it. I just am a little slow on the uptake a little bit sometimes. So thank you for putting that in the comments. I appreciate it. All right, so now that you can see the question that we're on, maybe that will help participation. So do you believe more women in power would help all women everywhere? What are your thoughts on this? Dana says absolutely. Do you want to expand on that at all? Yeah, Jackie, let's unmute you. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm a Kappa, only 2 years out of undergrad, but I totally agree with this. I think that if there were more women who could role model and mentor younger women in the professional world, it would completely help. Seeing a woman in power is so much more influential and life-changing to me than seeing a man in power, just because that's the typical paradigm. And I also have read the book Lean In, and she talks about this in the book, and I completely agree with everything she had to say. I really believe that if there were more women in power, we would be more apt to take leadership positions.
Great, thank you. I definitely agree, but I don't want to sound too biased. But I agree. I think what you said about it being inspirational to see women in power is so motivating. I was participating at a girls' academy a couple weeks ago, and one of the things I was telling the girls is that I'd love for there to no longer be any firsts, that to not have a first woman president or a first woman in space or a first whatever, fill in the blank, to get to the point where there are no more firsts, that it's just normal, and to have that be our new normal. All right, Kimberly, I'm coming to you.
Hi, yeah, I was actually going to say a lot of what Dana said. I currently work for a nonprofit as well, and I work with the women, or a group of women executives who are my volunteers, and they've really given me someone to look up to and strive to be. So I think more women in those leadership positions would give younger girls role models as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that role model or those mentors or even just leaders to look up to is so important. So I agree. Thanks, Kimberly. Anyone else? This is great so far. Thank you so much for everyone for jumping in. All right, moving on. All right. So what gender differences then exist regarding aspirations to top positions? Do you think more men than women say that they want to get to the top? And have you ever seen these gender differences in your own life at play? Dana.
Well, and I know in my own situation, it seems like a lot of the men I know are always looking for the next thing, and whereas a lot of the women in my life are fairly content with where they are, and it doesn't mean that we don't strive for something else, but we're kind of enjoying where we are in life. And a lot of the men in my life are just, they're always looking for the next thing, always going forward, and pushing to the next thing, whether that be a job or something they want to purchase, or, they're just always looking to the next thing rather than just enjoying the day.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else? Janet, you wrote in the questions that you have seen it at work. Do you want to elaborate at all? I'm going to share Jackie's comment. Jackie says that she thinks all women, like you mentioned, are their own barrier, and that in regard we don't often reach for the top. Women are afraid to say that they want to go after something, whereas men are not. Absolutely. All right, Janet, I'm unmuting you.
Okay.
There you go.
So this is interesting. A couple years ago, round table, and people were asking about what they wanted a career at the credit union to look like. And women had realistic contributions about where they thought 5 years. And a young man who was really not well qualified but a great employee said he wanted to be CEO within 10 years. And it's really interesting to me. I thought a woman would probably not say that, especially for very confident skills, ability to really be CEO. And other men sort of had high aspirations than the women did, and some were justified and some were not. So I thought it was a very interesting analogy.
Yeah. Thank you. A couple of comments have come in about the women being afraid of failure, and that holding women back, and maybe being a difference between the genders. Anyone else? All right, so this question dives really into what is at the heart of the differences between boys and girls, and how are they treated differently at school and at home growing up, and how this really goes into like boys are blue, girls are pink. That's how I always, describe this kind of situation. But so what role do you think that these gendered beliefs and expectations play into the kinds of aspirations boys and girls are encouraged or discouraged from having? And then can you think of a personal time when gender norms, for example, like boys don't become nurses and girls don't study physics, really influenced you in a decision that you made about your life? Don't forget to raise your hand if you have a comment. or you can put it in. Ooh, Jen Klug says that she has an MS in physics. Awesome. Do you want to share more about that? I can unmute you, Jen.
Sure. I basically spent most of my high school career enjoying the sciences and physics and decided that that was what I wanted to do. I was the only female where I went to school that was going for physics. It didn't really bother me. It's actually the reasons I joined a sorority, but otherwise I do. I didn't think that it was just a boy or girl thing, regardless of all the awkwardness, because I was the only girl.
Yeah, so were you the only girl in all of your classes, or the majority of them?
Yes.
Wow. Did you ever, I mean, maybe this is too personal, but ever find that as the only girl you either called on less or called on more, or did you have to, fight for time with a professor because of your gender?
Actually, I felt like I was called on more, and that I had a slightly different expectations of me as the only female in a lot of our classes. My lab reports were expected to be a little nicer looking, and I was asked to help and clean up the lab a lot afterwards, and we had labs, so there were certainly different expectations. But I enjoy working with people I work with.
Yeah, definitely. I imagine, too, for women who are placed in that role where they are the only women, that they carry the expectations of they represent all women instead of just themselves. Anybody else? Okay, next question. So this is really talking about gender and leadership, and kind of moving forward from the differences between boys and girls, but in what ways then are women and girls dissuaded from pursuing their goals and becoming leaders? In what ways is it differently that men and boys are encouraged to pursue their goals and become leaders? And then the second part of this is, have you ever been described as being ambitious, or was this a positive or a negative comment? And have you ever been referenced to as bossy, and how did that make you feel? If you haven't read the book, that is what Sheryl Sandberg's goal is, that girls will be seen as leaders and not as bossy for having those leadership traits as a young girl. Very similar to Tina Fey in her book called Bossy Pants, about how bossy sometimes has a different connotation. So anyone have any thoughts on this? Gender and leadership. And we're all Kappas, so, I'm sure we all have some thoughts on this. All right, some of the comments are saying that yes, that I've been labeled as bossy for taking charge and getting things accomplished. Agreed. I'm definitely called bossy all the time, and it sometimes makes me not want to be ambitious because bossy can be viewed as a negative. Meredith, do you want to share more? I can unmute you here. Oh, sorry, Meredith. No problem. She is in a spot where she cannot talk out loud. No problem. We won't make any jokes about how that's silencing your voice as a woman, right? Anyone else want to share? Again, you can just raise your hand or put it in the comments. Dana says that it can be viewed as positive or negative depending on what the person wants from you. Dana, do you want to expand on that?
Yes, I don't know if you guys can hear me. The kids are being really loud, but you know, if somebody wants you to get something accomplished, then they praise you for taking charge and getting things done. But if you're the one taking charge and getting something done and making them work or making them, you know, change something that they don't want to change, then you're just bossy. Which is hard because sometimes men in the same role, they don't get labeled as bossy. They're just, people accept what they tell them to do and go on about it. Where a woman gets labeled as bossy or bitchy, which is really frustrating.
I agree. Sometimes those character traits cross over, and for men they are positives and for women they are negatives, when in reality it's the same exact behavior that's being displayed. I was reading this quote the other day, I believe it was by Meryl Streep, but don't quote me on that, about how someone described her character that she was playing as a strong-minded woman. And she basically said that's ridiculous, because if you were asking a man about his role, he would not say he was playing a strong-minded man, you would just say he's playing a man. But when a woman is strong-minded, it's characterized that way instead of just as a woman. So I thought that was interesting. Janet says, yep, look at female leaders like Hillary, Michelle, Sarah, those are all political, and looking at famous Hollywood women that I'm sure they were all called bossy. Sometimes being bossy is getting things done. Janet, do you want to share more? I've unmuted you.
No, that's right. It's echoing so much. I'd rather listen to you.
Okay, sorry. I apologize if it is echoing too much. I know that makes it difficult. Okay, next questions we can talk about. Have you ever felt that you were ignored or silenced? And do you think that treatment was based on your gender? Why or why not? All right, Natalie, I see your hands raised. Go ahead.
Hey, actually, just today I was in a meeting. I'm an engineer, and so I'm one of few women in my office. And just today we were in a meeting, and it felt like every man was just talking and talking and talking, and I was sitting there just trying to jump in multiple times. But I don't think I was being ignored necessarily or silenced for any reason. I just think that women have a tendency to kind of sit back and listen and then give their input, and men a lot of times just keep on talking, and they like want to be heard, so they don't give an opportunity to sit back and let other people talk. So they're constantly just trying to jump in. But women, a lot of times, and this goes right in with the lean in. You got to lean in, and you got to speak up, and you've got to jump right in just with the men. Otherwise, you might not ever be heard, or you'll be ignored.
Absolutely. Thanks, Natalie. One of my favorite parts of the book is when Cheryl is talking about how she was either giving a presentation or it was in a work meeting. Oh, no, I think she was giving a presentation because she kept saying one more question, and finally a girl came up to her at the end and said, you only called on men after you said no more questions, because the woman was raising her hand and the men would just jump right in and say their question instead of waiting to be called on. And so she said, this is how I'm feeling, that I'm being silenced or ignored. And I think it was kind of a breakthrough moment for Sheryl Sandberg to say, oh, I'm not paying attention in my behavior, that I'm letting the men continue to speak just because they simply are not raising their hand and joining in that conversation. So, Natalie, that's kind of the same thing that you're experiencing, is that around the boardroom or around the conference table or whatever it is, that you do have to lean in and make sure that your voice is being heard. So, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? Okay, I apologize if I seem slow. I just want to make sure I'm making sure everyone's heard and that they want a chance to speak. They have a chance to speak. So our next question is one of my favorites. I think when we look at cultural depictions of career women, and can you think of any movies or TV shows that feature happy and successful men who have both careers and families? And then think about that and translate that to women. And if you can share an example of a depiction of career women, or just the generic, what we see when we see on TV and in movies and things about career women. Again, to chime in, you just have to raise your hand or put in the comments. Comments are saying career women are viewed as distant from their families. I will say, in my experience, one of my favorite shows is The Newsroom on HBO, and I think it's fabulous. I think it's relevant. It's Aaron Sorkin. I was a huge fan of The West Wing, whatever. But my problem is he writes the women characters in the show as all having this major character flaw, which I understand. Everyone has problems, but he has this character who's supposed to be the executive producer of this top news show, and she is always frazzled, can't catch a break, she's klutzy, and I guess maybe she wants to be portrayed as like a real woman, but at the same time, every time she does something smart, it's immediately brought down by her actions of messing up, or she puts her foot in her mouth and says something wrong, or basically is flawed in that aspect, even though she's supposed to be this put-together woman. Jackie says, women are never pictured as having it all, that they always have to sacrifice something, that it's never a happy and relaxed depiction. Absolutely. We'll get to that later, the myth of having it all. Janet says that the media usually has the woman cave in at the end, or they change careers to accommodate their family, and that men rarely change their careers. Yeah, I agree. I think it's usually the woman who is making that sacrifice at the end of the story arc in real life. I don't know when that story arc necessarily comes at the right moment, but definitely in movies and TV, women are seeing the most sacrifice. All right, anyone else? Okay, the next question. This is one of my favorites. Fear is at the root of so many barriers that women face. And what is your greatest fear? And what would you do if you weren't afraid? This has been, if you've been following Sheryl Sandberg as she goes on the Lean In circuit, I guess she's been kind of going around the country talking about Lean In. This is the big question, is what would you do if you were not afraid? It might be fun too. Maybe everyone wants to answer that in the comments. I can read them out loud. I won't share names, but if you are wanting to talk about what you would do if you weren't afraid, raise your hand. Otherwise, let's put it in the questions and just see what we would do if we weren't afraid. All right, someone said, I would start a local One Health group, one of the first in the country. That sounds awesome. Anyone else? What would you do if you weren't afraid? Would you put it in the questions? Another person says, travel the world on my own. Another one says, I would do what I love instead of what makes more money. Gosh, isn't that the truth? I'd quit my job and work at my nonprofit full time. What else? I love this question. Keep them coming. Oh, someone says they'd be a full-time Kappa volunteer. I love it. I would tell more people no. Oh, that's the truth. About a year ago, I went through some major life changes, and I spent about a month saying no to things and taking things off my plate. It was probably one of the best months ever, just to be able to say no and say, you know what, now is not the time. But I think definitely more people need to learn to say no more often. So I agree with that one. What else? What would you do if you were not afraid? Someone says, if I wasn't afraid, I would be okay with who I am and stop trying to be what others want me to be. Yeah, isn't that what it's all about? I mean, trying to find the real you and being relentless and finding who you are and who you're meant to be. I think that's what this question definitely gets to the heart of. All right, we are going to move on to the next question, but I just want to say thank you to those who did share what they would do if they weren't afraid. I know sometimes the hardest part is just saying it out loud. 2 years ago when I was starting my nonprofit, I was just paralyzed by fear of saying exactly what I wanted to do. I was in law school at the time, and it was, you know, people went to law school to become practicing lawyers, to go to a firm and be a lawyer that way. But that was never really in my plans, but it was very scary to say that out loud. So when you have that idea or you say what you're afraid of, it kind of takes away some of that fear. So thank you for those who shared. And if you want to keep throwing them in there, I'll keep saying them out loud, or tell someone tonight what you'd do if you weren't afraid. All right, so we're going to move on to the next kind of topic, sort of. And I just want to let you know that Lean In is just chock full of good stuff. Seriously, there's so much to cover that we will not even really be scraping the surface tonight. I have, you know, a ton of slides, but we'll probably not get to them because there's so much good stuff here. But we can definitely continue this conversation in the future. So don't fear if we don't get to a specific topic, or if there is something that you want to make sure we cover, throw it in the questions so I can see it, and we'll make sure we talk about it. But yeah, so sitting at the table. So the question here is, where do you usually sit? In the classroom or the conference room, in the middle of the action, on the side? Are you nervous about drawing attention to yourself? And I guess I'd also add that, what does that say about where you sit? I will say I personally in college was definitely like back row, didn't want to be noticed, just wanted to sneak in, just sit there and listen to the professor. And now that I am out of college and working, I am one of those people that needs to be in the middle or at the front just so I can be in on the action, hear what's going on, and be present, and try not to get distracted. So Dana says that she sits on the side. She likes to see everyone. That's so true. You want to be able to see the room. Not afraid to draw attention, that she really wants to get a lot out of the session. I think that's so true. I think you need to position yourself to where it's going to be the most beneficial for you. And what do you want to get out of it? I mean, it depends. Like, are you going to, just a huge lecture and you just need to listen? Or is it a board meeting? Is it a meeting with clients? Is it a meeting with an organization, the leaders on campus? What are you doing? I mean, that makes the difference as well. But being able to position yourself to sitting at the table. In Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg uses the example of they were having a meeting, and I think they were a couple of interns came in and or they were assistants to whoever she was meeting with, and they chose to sit off to the side, not at the actual table. And she basically flat out asked them and said, why didn't you grab a seat at the table? That opportunity was there for you. And they both chose to sit off to the side and take themselves out of that conversation. All right, one of the comments says, I have never thought about this, but I think in any of those situations, I typically sit either in the middle or near the back. I think this is because I am still in graduate school and not sure about when I can share my opinion or if it will be heard. That is so true, I feel like. Oh, yeah, Dana says, she says, sometimes women wait to be invited into the group. And that's so true. Sometimes we try to make sure our opinion is ready to be heard, or that people actually want it, and we're not going to just impose on people by sharing our opinions or things like that. So that's great. Our next question is, have you ever felt like a fraud at school or at work, and what makes you feel less insecure and more confident? My whole motto through grad school was fake it till you make it. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but I know I always have that in my head. Just fake it till you make it. Put a smile on your face. Act like you know what you're talking about. If you have to go home and research all night long just to figure out what you were supposed to know, definitely. And what makes you feel less insecure and more confident? I know for me, it's praise. I react very well to praise, saying, that's a great comment, or you did a really great job there. I'll feel more and more likely to participate or contribute the next time. One of the comments says, yes, all the time, and all the outstanding smart women I know have admitted this to me as well. I think this is one of those universal truths for women, that at some point or another we feel like a fraud and we feel insecure. And we really have no reason to, other than that we think that we are less. It feels like we're being that internal barrier again for us. Jackie says that every day when I feel this section, I felt like it was describing me. I always think someone is going to find out. I have no idea what I'm doing sometimes. My supervisor shared with me that she feels the same way and is still learning on a daily basis. Jackie, you are not alone. I feel like everyone here maybe on this call feels that way. But the important thing is to be able to overcome that imposter syndrome and know that you are there because you're meant to be there. You know, there's always more to learn, but if you're there for a reason, and acknowledging that, you know, you are good enough, that you have that knowledge, that you're there, and to be confident in your abilities, I think can help tackle that sort of imposter syndrome that we sometimes feel. Part of this too, I think, this next section is how women account for their success. This is my section, Jackie. If your section was about imposter syndrome, this is mine. Men succeed and they say, yep, I did that. Women succeed and it is, oh, the team accomplished that. Or, you know, our group really couldn't have done it without them. And so there's this difference between how men and women account for their success. Has anyone ever seen that at play in their life or at their work? And then how do you, and to what do you attribute your accomplishments? All right, Janet says, look at girls' sports teams and the support they give each other on the court and field versus boys. It's definitely a team versus individual. Dana brings up a good point and says she agrees with the statement, but she thinks that men don't always realize that the efforts come from a whole, so they are quick to grab the individual success and attribute it to their personal contributions, but not necessarily realize who else then played a part in that. Yeah, Jackie makes a good point too. She says that she hates discussing any of her accomplishments or bragging about myself, but knowing that plenty of men will do it in a heartbeat. And I think that's a really great point. And I think I had a quote about this, and I don't have a clue who said it or whatever it is, or even if I remember it correctly. But when women talk about their successes, it's automatically labeled into a bragging category, whereas when sometimes men do it, they don't realize it, and it doesn't come across as bragging, but women, it does. But yeah, you're not, it's hard to realize that you're not bragging about yourself, but that you are just attributing success to your skills or your contributions. Meredith says that this is especially true during job interviews. Yes, it's so hard to talk about your accomplishments, but men seem to do it much easier in those type of situations. Absolutely. And that's one of those things they always tell you to practice, is being able to talk about yourself. But I know for me personally, it's always such a hang up when I do go to interview. It's like, what am I saying that doesn't sound braggy? Where's that line to say, I'm a well put together woman and I got a good head on my shoulders and I have a lot of accomplishments without sounding like I'm boasting. Yeah. Interviews. That's a whole nother topic to itself, right? That's great. All right. Have you ever passed on opportunities because you were unsure or insecure? Or have you seen others pass on opportunities that they should have seized? All right. One of the comments is that yes, mostly because I am unsure of time commitments and how it will affect the family. Yeah, when you're taking into account other people, like your family, it's definitely difficult to feel very sure about a commitment when it may affect other people. And the person said that she changed her post-undergrad career path because of that very thing, and it's a real problem. What are some solutions? Like, what can we do to help ourselves and help other people feel more sure and feel more secure with themselves? What kind of support can we offer each other? I love this. Dana said that she made her husband read the book to help understand me more. I love that. I was reading parts of it out loud to my husband as well. I'm like, oh, this is totally us right here. Jackie says, I think women talking more positively about other women is the root of that problem. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one thing that we as Kappas, we do very well is we lift each other up and share in each other's successes and help boost each other's confidences. And I only wish more of that transferred outside of Kappa and into our day-to-day world. All right, the next question is, when have you challenged yourself, and did you succeed or fail, and did it make you more likely to challenge yourself in the future? I think every day is a challenge to go out there and, be the best person that you can be the best person at work, be the best person at home, be the best person at school. There's so many challenges, I think, and that staying true to yourself throughout all of that can be one of the biggest challenges. Anyone else want to share? Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments as we wrap up? I know it's getting close to 9 o'clock. Feel free to raise your hand or throw it in the comments. Dana says, I'm interested if anyone's husband or significant other read the book and what they thought about it. Can anyone share to that? Dana, I'm not seeing anyone else add, but that's definitely something we can look into and see if anyone else had comments on that. She says that her husband was defensive when I started reading, but really understood after he read it. And I think that's true. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface on what men can do to move the movement towards gender equality forward. And having them on board is really how we're going to make some significant changes. Natalie says that I've never thought to make my husband read it. However, that's a great idea. Janet says it would be interesting to find out how many men were involved in editing, publishing, etc. of the book. Absolutely. And through the book, she does talk a lot about her relationship with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. And so, and his support of her taking time to take on this project. So yeah, it would be interesting to kind of find out what those numbers look like. So as we wrap up, I just want to finish with what's next. Read the book if you haven't. It's a really great book. Like I said, I highly recommend it. I don't agree with everything she says, but I think she starts the conversation, which is super important for this generation. Continue the conversation. Continue to talk about these issues. And I will see if we can continue this conversation because there's so much we haven't even talked about tonight. Consider forming a lean-in circle. This is something that Sheryl Sandberg created. You can find out more at www.leanin.org. These circles are small groups of women who are there to support each other. I actually don't know if they're all women. I assume they maybe are integrated now with men and women, but you can find out more there. Yeah, and most of all, lean in and lead. So we're going to do a quick drawing. Let me see here. If I can pull up the random integer. All right, using a random number generator, it looks like our winner is Natalie McCormick. So you have won a $10 Amazon gift card. So I will work with Karen and we'll make sure that we get that to you. Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining me tonight. I'm really excited that we had this time. You can email me at kkgalex@gmail.com if you have questions or comments or concerns or anything about tonight. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to continue to talk about this conversation. Kimberly says that if anyone is in the San Francisco area, Cheryl is speaking tomorrow at Dreamforce, so definitely check that out if you're in the area. That would be an amazing opportunity. And yes, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your night and email me if you have any comments. Thank you.